Welcome back. I'm Professor Peter Jonasson, your stylish scientist. I wanted to talk a little bit about pseudo profound bullshit. Mm, there's lots of kinds of these ideas in the world that sound compelling, that sound interesting, that sound like they might even be true. And people fall for them quite easily. And I would forgive people a little bit for traditional forms of these things like tarot cards or astrology or even, of course, just traditional religion, because they have a kind of history behind them. There's a mass of movement, and there's this sense of the familiar and various things. But people are constantly coming up with new kinds of pseudo profound bullshit. And what amazes me as an academic, a man living in the ivory tower of university life, is just how easily people fall for this stuff. I'm coming to you now about this because I was recently presented with a kind of quote unquote medical therapy practice that I had never heard of before, and I had to, say I didn't know anything about it. This is a common thing in psychology. There's always some nonsense that somebody comes up with, and somebody asked me, "What do you think about this?" Like, no idea. So I decided to look it up. And what I found is just embarrassing to me. It's embarrassing because of the just how this is these kinds of belief systems and snake oil salesmen get away with this stuff. Now I understand why they get away with it, right? They were able to do is exploit people's intellectual weaknesses and things like wishful thinking and really potentially do damage or waste money. And so we need to think more clearly about the ideas that were presented. Now, there's many kinds, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but the one I want to talk about, I had to look it up, and I'm going to read it for you because I don't want to screw it up for you. Okay, so it's called recall healing or total biology. Right, and here's what it says: is a controversial. This is the AI definition. Okay, is a controversial alternative therapy. Okay, that claims physical and mental illnesses originate from unresolved emotional conflicts or traumas, often traced back to earlier in life. These can also be inherited from previous generations, right? So we have a kind of Freudian framework and a Jungian framework all there in one sentence, okay? It blends elements of German new medicine, so not legitimate medicine, not medicine that's been tested, but new medicine, psychogenealogy, let's just put fancy words together, okay? And of course, no surprise, as I mentioned about Freud, psychoanalysis. So, wow, okay? So the sniff test alone, like the claims that are made here are amazing, right? So the idea that physical illness might be traced back to psychological trauma, not just in your life, which is not totally unreasonable, but to past lives. Okay, well, if you get into the idea of epigenetics, okay, maybe this sounds reasonable. And that's one of the things that these pseudoscientific charlatans do, is they try to give you the appearance of things that are scientific. So Deepak Chopra is one of the best at these, right? So he likes to use fancy physics words, but when you put a physicist in the room with him, the physicist is like, you're using those words totally wrong. And I find myself in a similar situation when it comes to, say, evaluating science, evaluating claims by psychology researchers, like that people put forth in their lives, because my bullshit detection mechanism is more finely tuned, right? So superficially, it sounds like, okay, it could maybe be true. Maybe it's possible that these traumas, but notice how they are like tied in a way. Yes, okay, stress causes problems in people's lives. Stress from childhood leads to development of X, Y, and Z. But they're linking a very specific, like they have a matching system in this recall healing. Indeed, you will struggle, as I struggled, to find scientific articles, right, about this. Now, what do I mean by scientific articles? I don't mean some nonsense that somebody wrote. I mean articles that transcend anecdotal evidence or propaganda from the proprietor, some guy named Robert, I can't think of it, the Guillaume or something like that. All right. The proponents of this, like this gentleman, says that each illness corresponds to a specific conflict, and that's a fundamentally different approach than what we know of from psychology, and of course the idea that the body and the brain has they have a relationship. Not specific, but your body breaks down, and so you have heart attack and you have arteriosclerosis and other problems, but they're tying one to one in principle. Okay. They are also claiming that awareness and acknowledgement of the root emotional trauma can lead to healing. This is very psychoanalytical, right? That if you know why you have some ailment like cancer, the knowledge will cure the disease. This is a miraculous claim, right? Carl Sagan, of course, would say, a legit scientist by any measure, right? Miraculous claims require miraculous evidence. And there just isn't such evidence here, but they're amazing claims and they fit with what people want to believe. People want to believe that the Western establishment of medicine and science are corrupt and holding back. This is kind of narcissistic conspiratorial thinking, right? As well as this idea that emotions are so central to the process really fits with a lot of people, women in particular's kind of way of viewing the world. This idea that emotions are more important than logic, right? So your emotions are important to you, but they are in no way a good bit of information about reality. So the fact that you like a claim has no bearing on whether it's true or not, but people are duped by this easily. And as an academic living in my ivory tower, it's very hard sometimes for me to understand how people can fall for this stuff. But most people's brains don't work this way, right? Academics are weird, and I'm especially weird because I live in this really empirical, rational space. But for most people, it's like, oh no, I like this idea. That's good enough. It resonates with me. That's good enough. You should call bullshit more often, is my advice. This is why this section is called Science Samurai. Our goal here is to call bullshit on what we would call pseudo-profound bullshit. Okay? And the last point, again, remember, this is from AI, because I really struggled to find good information that wasn't based in, say, some website from some company that was making money. I mean, if someone's making money off of crazy claims, you should already be skeptical, but people aren't. Yep. And lastly, and I mentioned this already a little bit, but diseases like cancer, autoimmune disorders, chronic conditions stem from subconscious emotional trauma. Again, hearkening back to this Freudian perspective. Yes, you can be unaware of trauma, right? And these things can cause stress in your life, and they might increase the probability that you get different problems. But the framework that this takes ultimately has no scientific merit behind it, right? So that the evidence for the science of this is minimal to none, right? So I searched and I found one paper. This was a dissertation written by someone. It was a PhD dissertation written by I can't remember the name of the person, but at whatever university, right? And what they say, he or she says, I think it's a she, says very early on is that there's virtually no evidence to back this up. And the evidence we have is anecdotal. Well, in terms of the hierarchy of evidence that you should trust, anecdotal is the least you should trust. Well, what does this woman do in her dissertation? She simply ups it to the next one up, which is not particularly trustworthy either, which was qualitative analysis, interpretive analysis of what people say, right? The only way to know that something really works is to do the highest level of scientific evidence, which is randomized control trials. This is the only way we can know that something actually works. You might feel it works, right? You might feel this therapy is effective for you or effective for your patients, but the only way we know it works is to do the test. Indeed, this was Popper's main objection to psychology when he wrote his kind of a most famous book. And this is why I didn't like psychology, is because it felt very pseudoscientific. It was very informed by Freud. It wasn't based on strong, rigorous data where you're falsifying hypotheses. No, it was based on anecdotal evidence, small sample data, maybe at best correlational data. And indeed, correlational data is in the middle. It is better than qualitative research, but it doesn't give you any sense of causation. Right? And so you're not going to find, and if you do, please, link the studies down below, because I'm happy to be wrong. That's one of the things about scientists that you have to get over, is that we're happy to be proven wrong, but we're simply trained to evaluate reality in a particular way. And I think I was born this way, if I'm honest, to quote Lady Gaga, to evaluate the world in a particular way. Okay, so there seems to be no empirical evidence. There seems to be no peer-reviewed studies. I couldn't find any. Don't get me wrong, I didn't search for hours. There could be a random empirical study from Hungary or something. I always tell my students, don't claim that there's nothing. Like, there's a good chance it's been researched, you're just not finding it. But let's just go on. There's so few, it's really hard to find. And if it's good science, trustworthy science, true science, there would be studies that you could find on simple search engines like Google Scholar. Given its focus on anecdotal evidence, there are no randomized control trials. And of course, importantly, it totally violates everything we know about established medical science, about biology. It sounds good, right? That's one of the features of pseudo-profound bullshit, is that it sounds good. It gives you the appearance of science, but isn't really scientific. And because most people aren't trained in science, and people hated science in school, they object to the very premise of being scientific. No, you're just closed-minded, Peter. No. I'm not closed-minded, right? I am open-minded, but I have a filter, and that filter is a bullshit filter. You should have a bullshit filter too, my friends. Number two, as a criticism, it has pseudoscientific foundations. So, for example, new medicine has not only been rejected in medical science, but it has no basis in medicine. It is inconsistent with everything we know. And so it's not evidence-based psychology. It's not evidence-based medicine. It simply is pseudoscientific, as in, again, like, it looks like science, but it isn't science, right? So astrology is a pseudoscience. Now, again, I can kind of forgive people's astrology leanings, in the sense that it's part of the Slavic tradition or something like that, right? I can kind of forgive it, right? But the fact that new bullshit comes up, right, is miraculous to me. We know so much about the body and the world, but it fits with people's mistrust inclinations. And so, it would be interesting to study why people still fall for these ideas, even though the world is around them giving them better information, like smoking. Oh, it won't kill me. Yes, it will. Smoking is bad for you. Okay. Obviously, it has some ethical and legal problems and physical risks, right? So if you give people bad medical advice, they delay care. So this not only is it intellectually bullshit, right? Which is, you say, okay, what does it matter, Peter? It's not hurting anyone. It's just what people believe. Yeah, but people's beliefs translate into actions. And so if you delay treatment, because of some nonsense that you're selling people, you're not only profiting on their pain, but you're killing them. You're increasing the probability that they will die, because you simply are uninterested in curing them. You're interested in your philosophy or making money or whatever it is, right? There is a potential for victim blaming, right? It's your fault for this trauma. You have to deal with it, right? So the idea that cancer is not something that affects you, right? So if you get cancer from power lines or from some toxin in the environment, you then say, oh no, it's from some trauma. It's from when your dad didn't love you when you were a kid. And of course, that's part of the problem here, is that it's all local trauma. It's the things that happen in your life. It overemphasizes the importance of the problems in your life. And so it actually has the potential to make you feel worse about your life. It's more likely that, the ecology is affecting you than, daddy didn't love you and things like that. It doesn't mean that doesn't upset us, but for that to cause cancer, wow, what a claim. If you buy this, I have a bridge to sell you in Arizona. I mean, you gotta be kidding me. Okay? They are incapable of laying out what are the mechanisms. So one of my favorite academics Martin Zajkowski here, when people give talks, he often asks them, well, what's the mechanism that links these two things, right? Okay, there's a correlation here. Okay, that there could even be correlations between emotional trauma in one's childhood and the diseases they have as an adult. But what are the physical mechanisms that generate the actual disease, right? How do we get from point A to point B? This research doesn't have that. This idea, this practice, this recalled healing doesn't have this. And it doesn't fit with anything we know about neurology, neurobiology, therefore, right? What's the origin of cancer, for example? And of course, most of this research, as I said, is anecdotal. It doesn't deal with placebos, right? So let's say you feel better, right? Well, the fact that you feel better doesn't necessarily mean you are better, right? So it's a psychological trick. When people feel like they're getting attention for a problem, right? They often feel better. And it's not that they're getting a cure, they're not getting better from their cancer or better from their PTSD. It's simply the being heard, for example, is quite powerful, right? And so we underestimate just how much our brain is susceptible to these things, right? We really don't understand at an intuitive level our own brains, and so we're easily convinced by feeling good, right? To go back to our other videos about happiness, we're tricked by people, for example, listening to us, right? We like this quite a bit. The conclusion I get from ChatGPT is it's not supported by scientific evidence. It's pseudoscience. It oversimplifies complex diseases, lacks rigorous validation. But there are, of course, evidence-based therapeutic practices, which no surprise ChatGPT would give us, right? CBT, mindfulness, which I'm not a big fan of, but let's leave it aside, and other things. Why? Because people have gone about the research to say, this is something that we can show works, right? We've done the study. If they haven't done the study, it's a bit suspicious, okay? Now, I think there's also some other criticisms that I would like to highlight for you. One of which is that there's an engagement here of a kind of Cartesian dualism, the idea that the mind and the body are separate things. They're not, right? They are one thing. There is no mind, there is the brain, and then there's the experience of our thoughts, and we call that our mind, right? And so these are linked systems. And so in that way, this recall healing is not totally off because they're linked, but there are more scientific ways to link these things, like Marcus Rontala's work on the gut microbiome and how that relates to depression, for example. Rigorous studies can be done. So if it's legit, someone can do the study and someone can go forward with it, right? And we can say, okay, look, there is evidence, right? But maybe there's not evidence. But if you're trying to sell something to someone, you don't want the test. You don't want someone to say, look, it doesn't work. The truth is, if someone came along and did a study that showed that this was actually bullshit, right? The proponents would still follow along. Why? Because one of the features of pseudo-profound bullshit is it has a kind of quasi-religious component. It's cultish, right? And so if you go to these websites for this stuff, they even look like cults. The videos on YouTube, they feel cultish. They feel indoctrination. Right? So there's this idea, there's separation between mind and body, and the trauma that your mind experiences is transferred. No, your body experiences trauma. Your brain is part of that trauma. No problem, right? It's part of that system, I should say, okay? I've also mentioned this wishful thinking quite a bit, and this is one of the things that people really fall for, makes them fall for a lot of things, is they want to believe. They're a bit like Fox Mulder in the X-Files, right? He wants to believe. And Dana Scully is the skeptic. Now, remember, this is a fictional show, so the aliens and all this crazy stuff that they show where they're trying to open Scully's mind is fiction, right? But I'm, in this case, acting like Scully is, right? She's saying, show me the evidence for this, right? Like, there are other simpler explanations. This is one of the things that people really struggle with, is that to claim that this amazing thing is true, you must rule out all simpler hypotheses, one of which is, of course, the placebo effect, for example. Yeah? Lastly, there's a whiff of new agey thinking here, right? It's this kind of it's kind of a hippie kind of mentality. It's a rejection of modernism. It has a kind of like, we have secret knowledge, right? It's like, no, it's about feelings and sitting in Zen meditation and coming to terms with your emotions and all of that. Indeed, modern evidence suggests that the more that you think about your past traumas, the worse they get in affecting your life. So modern therapy, which is often based on talk therapy, when it's not focused on simply like something specific like cognitive behavioral therapy or building strategies to go forward, when you ruminate about your traumas, you cause problems in your life. You revisit those, you reinvigorate those memories, making your life worse. So I was hoping this wouldn't be too long, but I just couldn't. It's very hard to get through this kind of stuff very quickly. Maybe you're like me. Tell me in the comments that you do you struggle with where to even start to talk to people about these kinds of ideas. You don't want to be mean and offend people, but you're guaranteed almost to do so because you're questioning people's quasi-religious ideas. And when you question people's quasi-religious ideas, you're guaranteed to offend them. And so I really struggle with this. And so when people present me with this, I try to say, oh, that's interesting. Oh, I don't know about that. I'll have to look it up. And that's what happened when I learned about this recall healing. I was like, I played devil's advocate. I'm like, well, how does that work? Like, I'm confused. I don't know about this. Tell me about this, right? And so we must be better consumers of science in the world, right? And so one of the ways you can be a better consumer is just to be slightly more skeptical when someone puts something forth that sounds amazing, that sounds like a really simple solution to the problem. Like, oh wow, it's just that. Oh yeah, that. And if it feels good to you, also you should say, wait, be skeptical if it feels good to you, right? We live in a time where people think if it feels good, it must be true. Your feelings are not good arbiters of truth. You must learn basics in science, how to evaluate evidence. I mean, I have books behind me, like one called Corrupted Science, and it's about this kind of stuff, about how crazy ideas can be put forth and people will buy them, like phrenology as an example. Yeah. This is the feeling of the bumps on your people's skull, and that could allow you to interpret their personality or something like that. So if someone's making money, that also should be a red flag to you. Like if money is tied up with this, and I don't mean grant money, I mean someone is personally profiting, right? So if I get grant money from the government, look, it's like I'm doing scientific work, right? Maybe I'm wrong, but sometimes we have to do wrong things to find out that they're wrong, right? Not do wrong things. We have to study things that we don't know are true or not to find out that they're wrong so we can exclude them. This is very much a very Popperian approach to science, right? Like, let's exclude bad hypotheses. So too good to be true is definitely a red flag, right? This is like you would do in your dating life, right? If someone seems too good to be true, you're like, what's the secret here, right? What's going on? You know? So I don't want to belabor this anymore, taking more of your time than I want. So I'll leave you at that. So resist the flood of bullshit, my friends. Ciao.